Welcome aspiring game developers, my name's Benny, and this is my guide on how to make story-based games. Creating characters is a big part of any story, and in order to do that correctly, you have to focus on a few things. For every important character, you have to create a background for them. You have to know them back to front in order to properly convey them. And the goal with these kinds of characters is to make them believable. If you were to describe a character to a person in real life, and the person could not tell if it was a fictional entity, then you've done a good job creating a character. A decision that should be made early in the development process is what kind of character you want your player to be. There are blank slate characters and there are fleshed out characters. Blank slate, as the name implies, means that the character has no personality qualities of their own, allowing the player to put themselves in the shoes of the main character. While fleshed out characters are entities with fully realized goals, backstory, and motivations. Both blank slate and fleshed out characters have their pros and cons, but let's start out with blank slate. Some positives are the feeling of accomplishment is heightened. The logic behind this being, it's not the character overcoming the obstacle, it's you, the player. And this really does heighten player immersion as well, as they become more invested in your world. The cons are that there is no connection to the main character. You can't have a connection to a white wall, essentially. And this can make story-heavy games a little awkward, as you have a full cast of characters interacting normally, but you have one that is mute. Some pros and cons to fleshed out characters is you call the shots as the developer. It is your character driving the story and not as much the player. This makes games more linear, which can be easier to build. However, weak characters can backfire, as if a character does not resonate with the player tends to fight against what you're trying to do, or worse yet, they just completely quit playing the game. This type of design also gives less player agency, as the player cannot do as much whenever the character is already on a set path. Just building a story is not enough to create a video game, however. You have to focus on gameplay integration. Now, it's important to start with familiar territory. You have been a player before, and because of this, you know what works and what doesn't in genres you're a fan of. A good key thing to focus on is pacing in a video game. You don't want the player to be slowed down by unnecessary things. Having your game flow is critical to it being a successful title. I've mentioned a few times previously the word immersion, and immersion truly is the key to making a good game. People play video games to escape for a while. If your game truly immerses your player, people will take notice. It's important to have as little moments as possible where the player realizes they're playing a video game. This is why extensive bug testing and story development is so critical. Starting to talk about environmental storytelling, there really is, in my opinion, no better game that does this than Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight is such a rich, expansive world that, as seen here, each colored area tells you something different about this world that you're inhabiting. The starting town shows how thin the population was. The Forgotten Crossroads shows you how expansive this fallen kingdom used to be. Green Path gives you an idea of how long it's been since the collapse. All these areas really bring rich story to your game without a single line of dialogue. Just giving an overview of the most important takeaways are that if you're building a story-based game, it's key that you make good characters, you effectively utilize your player character, your gameplay flows well, you immerse your player, and your environment tells the story without having dialogue spoken to the player. I hope this was informative, and thank you so much for listening.